first, let's get to the latest out of Washington. The Trump administration is cracking down on Chinese telecom giant Huawei. Now, this effectively is banning it from doing business with American companies. Joining us now to break things down is Yahoo Finance's Akiko Fujita. And Akiko, when you take a look at the latest developments on this, what is happening here?
Yeah, so let's try to unpack this because there are two specific actions that were taken yesterday. The first one came from the White House, that executive order essentially enabling the U.S. to ban telecommunications equipment from, quote, foreign adversaries. They didn't specifically single out China or Huawei. But this more significant movement yesterday came from the Department of Commerce adding Huawei to a so-called entity list. It's essentially a trade blacklist that bans the company from buying components and parts from American suppliers. And that's a significant blow to this Chinese company. They don't have a significant footprint in the U.S., but they do buy about $16 billion in goods annually from American suppliers. The escalation prompted the Chinese Commerce Ministry overnight to urge the U.S. to end what it called wrongful practices and to create favorable conditions for normal cooperations between the two nations. We also got a release from the company saying that, look, they are still open to speaking with leaders over in Washington about concerns on national security. But the company also said that restricting Huawei from doing business in the U.S. will not make the U.S. more secure or stronger. Instead, this will only serve to limit the U.S. to inferior yet more expensive alternatives, leaving the U.S. lagging behind in 5G deployment and eventually harming the interests of U.S. companies and consumers. And while the focus is on Huawei, this move coming from the Department of Commerce certainly expected to hit Huawei's American suppliers as well. We're talking about companies like Qualcomm, Micron Technologies, Intel as well. Some of those companies under pressure today in this session, and they have seen this before. Remember, it was a few years ago when the U.S. banned ZTE from buying from American suppliers. That nearly crippled the company, but the U.S. did release that ban shortly after as part of a broader discussion on trade with the Chinese. The question is, this time around, is the administration doing this to amp up the pressure against the Chinese at a time when it increasingly looks like talks have reached a stalemate between Washington and Beijing, or is this a long-term play? If it is, analysts say that this could really have a ripple effect beyond the U.S. Remember, there's a lot of European operators, telecom carriers there, that use Huawei equipment in their infrastructure. If Huawei is unable to source the parts from American suppliers, they're not able to produce the equipment, that's going to have an effect on how European carriers operate as well. Sarah Sanders today was asked whether the latest moves was an attempt to drive Huawei out of the U.S. She said simply, our goal is to protect American interests and American entities.
Yeah, talk about the massive ripple effects that just throughout worldwide telecom industry. When you start putting that in perspective, I mean, we really still don't know the scope of this. Akiko Fujita, thanks so much for breaking this down.